Venus, and Jupiter all in the same sign. And in the classical sense, it forms a Saraswati Yoga when it falls in an angle from one of the, from the ascendant. Even though I've seen several, especially Vedic astrologers, focusing on Venus is debilitated. Yes, it is, but it's also with exalted Mercury, and it's also with Jupiter. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of power now, especially creatively, a lot of creative power. And that's related to the goddess Saraswati. Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter are all three the gentle planets. Also the moon, but the moon is a little trickier. Mercury, Venus, Jupiter are the ones that really make us want to create something beautiful, something inspiring. Beautiful is Venus, inspiring is Jupiter. And then the skills and the enjoyment of being creative is Mercury, being curious and skilled. So when you bring those three planets together, you get a lot of potential for creativity. Now, Mercury's also about to go retrograde, which is another thing. So before you say, what about Mercury retrograde? Well, that's another thing. So Mercury retrograde is more introspective. So that will show that it's a time for internal sort of creativity as well. But the reason I'm making this video is because there's really a lot of potential to unlock a lot of creative energy now. And that means if you're a writer or a musician or even, no matter what it is that you create, it's a great time to do it now. And that includes like studying spiritual knowledge and wisdom. That's a big part of being creativity. That's in fact, in some ways, the highest form of creativity. And because we are actually creating ourselves on the highest level. And so again, it's related to the goddess Saraswati, who is the one who sits on a swan, the one who wrote the Vedas. Very pure knowledge. And what can happen is we kind of lose the thread between something like the Vedas and spiritual knowledge and wisdom and something like music or writing or art. What's the connection? Where do those things link up? Where do those things connect? Well, where they connect is in your heart. They connect in your heart. And what those gentle planets give us and what their greatness shows us is the beauty and joy of life. It's really all we're looking for. Especially Venus is the happiness, but Mercury is also the curiosity and the interest in things and the enjoyment of knowledge. Educators have known for a long time that if you make learning fun, then children will learn. Learning games, right? Like a game. Make it a game and people will learn it because they enjoy it, because they love it. It doesn't feel like learning at all. And this is one of the things I tell my students or my potential students all the time. You need to find the thing that you love and do it all the time, as much as you can. Your life should revolve only around what you enjoy and what you love. And you should have almost no tolerance for difficulty. That doesn't mean that you won't go through difficulty. It means that staying stuck in something that's just hard and stressful all the time, you should have very little tolerance for that. You should gravitate toward what you love. I'm not saying what's easy, because they're different. Because many times the thing that you love is also not going to be easy necessarily. But when you're aligned with something that you love, you're not going to give up on something just because it's hard, because you love it and you enjoy it. And your greatness will emerge when you're aligned with something that you love, that you enjoy, and that will be the greatest source of wisdom in your life that you have. You don't have to take my word for it, just examine your life. What do you already love so much that you can't stop thinking about it? And therefore, if someone asks you about it, you can talk on and on about it, and you get so excited and you enjoy it so much. What is that thing? Well, that's where your greatness really lies. That's what you should be focusing on. You should stop thinking about things like, well, can I make a living at it, or this or that? Of course, you have to keep making a living, but I'm saying as far as your evolution as a person is going to come down to how much you're living in alignment with those things that you enjoy, which are Mercury things, and how much beauty and happiness it brings your life, which is Venus things. And those things lead to the highest wisdom, which is Jupiter. And this is the nexus of spiritual growth as well. Eventually, that love and that enjoyment and that curiosity leads you straight to the source of your own heart, your own spiritual development, your own spiritual growth. And we can bring it down to things, we can look at the planets also as karakas or indicators, like Venus is the indicator of relationships and people, Jupiter of teachers and gurus and higher wisdom, Mercury, again, of details and speech and communication. So those three things come together when we have a Saraswati Yoga. We have them in the same place. But the real overarching theme and principle of why it's called Saraswati Yoga is what I'm talking about on a more metaphysical, on an abstract level. When we look at these things, Vedic astrology names things, not just Vedic astrology, but all in Indian wisdom. The name of something is, like, in many ways, the most important thing, or at least one of the most important things. It describes the energy. And so, again, many times when people get into this this relationship with something like Saraswati or Shiva or Ganesha or something, they think that you have to be Indian or Hindu to understand it. Many times people don't even understand what deities are. Why do we talk about deities? Like, why do we talk about gods? Because they refer to energies that are higher, that are metaphysical, that are bigger than just our mundane life on earth, our mundane world. And so the symbol of Saraswati, that form, when you look at that form, you ponder that form. It's a young girl. For instance, Saraswati was the daughter of Brahma, not the wife. The other two female deities, Durga and Lakshmi, are the spouses of Shiva and Vishnu. Saraswati is the daughter of Lord Brahma, pure, so there's a purity, there's an innocence. So this return to an innocent mind and this purity of sitting on a swan, which is the very symbol of purity, this big white bird, so elegant, floating across the water. If you've ever seen swans, they seem to just glide across the water. They just glide, which is a symbol of gliding on top of the ocean of Maya, the ocean of illusion, this ocean of the world. And so the symbol of a swan just gliding across, very lightly, gliding across the surface of the world. is very important. And the purity of mind and heart to be curious, like I just said, to be curious and like an innocent, like when we were younger, like when we were children, and we just said, why? Why does this happen? Why does that happen? And we have no answer yet. And it's easy to think that the child is stupid, but of course we realize children have enormous amount of wisdom because they're not corrupt yet. And in many ways they see beyond, and we used to see beyond this hardened, sort of calcified reality that we now perceive, where we're so hooked into the world and we've forgotten that the world is an illusion, that the world is Maya, that the actions of the world are not a concrete reality themselves. They come from an invisible force, an invisible energy. So this whole thing is what is called Maya in Indian thinking, and the symbol of the swan is what glides across the ocean of Maya. Almost like the skin of the world. The world is like, Maya is like a veil that's draped over the world, or like the skin, and just beneath it all is the truth. Is the truth. Meaning, and just think about it for a second. Think about what happens when you're in the water. Being in the water is pretty amazing because you actually, when you go underwater, there's a whole other world down there. A whole other world. And then you come up and you're like, okay, now I'm back in this world. Now I'm back in this world. My eyes are above the water. Now I'm looking at this world. And then we submerge under the water again, and there's a whole other world down there. That it's always there. We just never see it. Fish and all kinds of stuff going on down there. We just never see it. And this is analogous to reality and truth and what's in our heart and all our spiritual practices. This is why water and the heart and the mind is what we need to submerge ourselves in. When we do meditation, we're actually going deep into the water, deep into the waters of the heart. And this is related to the moon, because the moon is the depth of feeling in the heart. But instead of going into the depth of feeling in the heart, we go up and down on the waves of emotion. And we're mistaking the depth of the heart, the depth of the ocean, and all that's going on, we're mistaking that depth to be just the surface. We think that our heart and the truth of our being is found on the surface of the ocean, is found on this skin, on these waves that go up and down, these emotional waves. We think these emotional waves of the world, which is just the world generating samsara, which is us, our mind actually projecting it onto the world. The world is neutral, actually. It's our mind and our karma that is projecting all of this and creating all of this because we take it to be real. And so we go up and down on the waves of emotion and never sink beneath the waves into the ocean. But you notice swans, they don't live on the ocean. They're not going up and down. They glide across placid, still water. The placid, still water, that's where the swan glides. It just glides across. And the other thing about the swan is the water doesn't penetrate their feathers. They're insulated from the wetness. They don't get wet. Even though they're in the water, they don't get wet. Their feet do, but they don't. And we're wet. We're drowning in the ocean of illusion. So I'm talking about these things because they're very powerful metaphors now. Very powerful metaphors with the Saraswati Yoga in the sky. even though it's in Virgo, where Venus is debilitated and Jupiter is also not so happy. I'm not going to talk so much about that right now because it would overshadow the power, the creative power right now. So I just wanted to talk about this because we're going to have this Saraswati Yoga in the sky for a while. Jupiter, Mercury, and Venus are all very close together right now, about 4 to 6, 7 degrees. Mercury just turned retrograde, and so Mercury's going to go back into Leo in about 10 days. Yeah, so Mercury will go back into Leo on September the 9th. He'll be in Leo. And then, so between now and September the 9th, we'll have this Saraswati Yoga for about 10 days. Then by the time Mercury goes back into Virgo again, Venus will have moved into Libra. So between now and September 9th, it's a great time to really connect with your deeper creative heart, especially with the purity of teachings, pure teachings like from the Vedas or astrology or yoga or Ayurveda or something where that's pure teaching, and reconnect with that curiosity of life, the curiosity that you had as a child to want to understand everything and want to know everything. And that beauty and happiness, that is your nature. And anytime you get too far away from that beauty and happiness, your whole being revolts. Because that's where your greatness lies. You're not meant to just live in service of stress and difficulty. But the deeper thing is, once you're connected to the things that you love, you also will be able to persevere through the difficulty very easily, because you're not going to give up on the things you love just because they're difficult. And in that example, you see the greatness, you find your greatness, because when you're able to stay focused and connected and committed, even though it's difficult, that's when you get closer to that part of your soul that needs to evolve, because spiritual progress is hard. It's hard. It's really hard. I'm sorry, but it is. It's the hardest thing you'll do, because you have to consciously destroy your ego. And your ego is everything to you, even though you might not think it is. This sense of separateness, this identity that you have that you've invested everything in, that's the ego. All the people that love you, all the people you love, all the people in the world and everything you are and all of the stuff that's everything. That's the ego. And it's really hard to see beyond it. It takes enormous commitment. And usually when things start getting hard, especially for our ego, we want to avoid it. We want to project the pain onto somebody else. We want to do anything but face it and sit with it and go, that's just my ego. Oh, my ego is so huge. Oh, God, it's so painful to see. And if you can't stay with something that you love, and eventually you'll start to love that. And once you start to love that, the yogi loves that. That's the difference between us and a great spiritual master or a great yoga master or one who is authentic in their spiritual growth. They actually love that. They look for situations where their ego is hiding out so they can face that difficulty. That becomes their game. That becomes the fun thing in their life. The thing we avoid like crazy, they love. So this is why eventually, as we start to fill our heart with sort of mundane levels of creativity, and we start to express our unique self, we get closer to that truth, closer to that true heart within us, and then everything starts to open up. We start to see our spiritual reality and our spiritual truth. And it's much bigger than the ego. This is why we're able to persevere through the difficulties, because then that creative spiritual joy, that creative spiritual love just smashes the ego, because the ego is also very puny. It's very small. And it takes a lot of effort and a lot of ignorance to keep it going. And when we get close to the truth of our heart, the ego can't breathe anymore. It has a hard time, especially the more diabolical qualities of the ego, the attention's getting and the projecting everything. It gets really hard when you're connected to your heart, especially through some kind of work or some kind of creative endeavor, because you start to see your problems coming up in the midst of trying to bring your creative gift out into the world. I've seen it like with my astrology practice and my teachings. It's not because, I don't encounter the ego as I'm learning it. I encounter it, for me, as I share it. And then I have to see my personality problems and my ego a lot more when I was younger, when I started doing readings or started teaching and getting frustrated with people or irritated or not having the confidence to show up, and all of those things that are just the ego. Once your heart is filled with all that joy, then you can't let those things hold you back anymore. And as you do that, the ego gets smaller and smaller, and then you get into deeper and deeper levels of destroying it. You have to. And the thing is that you have to do that, otherwise your vision and that thing that you love will not grow. Many people experience this naturally when they have children, because children naturally make us do this. Anyone who's had children, they realize the children start repeating back all of their negative patterns, and they go, oh boy, I have to stop this. I'm turning my child into a diabolical monster like me. I gotta stop. So there's enormous possibility now. You want to fill your heart with the things you love and do it all the time. The last thing I'll say about the ego, I don't want to forget, but it's a great metaphor from Osho, or as he used to be called, Rajneesh. One of the best metaphors I've ever heard for the ego, is just fabulous, is he said, the ego, it's like riding a bicycle, which seems really strange. He said, in order to keep the ego going, you have to keep pedaling. If you stop pedaling, just like on a bike, the ego will just stop. Just stop it. Just stop the ego. And people are like, well, how do I stop the ego? How do you stop it? How do you stop this identity that we've have everything wrapped up in? And what he said is, it's just like a bicycle. If you stop pedaling the bicycle, it'll stop. But you've been pedaling for such a long time that it has a lot of inertia right now, a lot of momentum. And you're so used to pedaling the ego, and literally pedaling is also a word for like selling, but you're so used to riding on the bicycle of the ego, and you just pedal it all the time, that you don't know how to stop pedaling. So he says, just stop pedaling. When the ego comes up, don't keep riding the bike. Don't keep pedaling the bike. It's a great, simple kind of metaphor, like, yep, here I am. Here's a situation with another person, and I'm getting challenged, and I'm ready to jump on that bike and start pedaling toward them, or pedaling away from them, or trying to evade some attraction, some aversion. It's like, first of all, sit still, which was a big Osho teaching. And it's a great teaching. Just be quiet, be silent. Try to connect with that which is silent, which is not full of activity. So, in the next 10 days, even though we have eclipses coming and all kinds of stuff, this is there's a lot of creativity when Jupiter, Venus, and Mercury come together. In particular, for those who have a Gemini rising, Virgo rising, Sagittarius rising, and Pisces rising, because it's those angles. There's a lot of juice in this. That's the classical Saraswati Yoga in angles from the ascendant. It's for all of us, of course, the Taurus and the Capricorn people also, because it's the same element. It's in the trines for them. So, but really, it's for all of us to be aligned with Saraswati, purity, childlike innocence, and the joy to just glide above the drama and the ocean of Maya and illusion for a while.